Basil I of the Byzantine Empire was a schemer, a murderer, and a brilliant emperor. But before we can explore his impressive and bloody rise to power, we must first establish a basis in historical fact. Most importantly, we must answer the question, what was the Byzantine Empire? To find that answer, we have to go back to the 5th century AD, and to the city of Rome. So, to put it bluntly, the 5th century was not at all a good time for Rome. Barbarian armies launched an onslaught of attacks against an empire that was already weakened by civil war. A period of climate change, known as the Little Ice Age, caused famines across Rome's lands, and in an attempt to combat some of these difficulties, the empire had been split in two, with a different emperor reigning in the east and the west. In the west, the emperorship was in a state of constant flux, as generals from all across Rome's vast territories used their power in an attempt to crown themselves emperor. Not that it was really worth the trouble, as by the end of the 5th century, the Western Emperor held very little control over most of his territories. In 476 AD, the last Western Emperor was deposed by a barbarian king named Odoacer, and the Roman Empire in the West came to an end. But Odoacer accepted the supremacy of another man, of another emperor, because to the east, centered around the city of Constantinople, the legacy of Rome lived on in the form of the Byzantine Empire. But before we dive into that, if you're new here and like what you see, don't forget to go down below and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you catch all future episodes of Super Easy History. Following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the Byzantines to the east continued to exist for centuries, and they continued to have emperors. Now, if you were a scholar in the early 10th century and wanted to make a list of all the men most likely to take over as the leader of the successor state of Rome, you probably would have included noblemen, royalty, or famous generals. You probably wouldn't have included a young man named Basil the Macedonian. He was born sometime around 811 AD to a peasant family in the Byzantine province of Macedonia. His exact ethnic origins are unknown, though he could have been Armenian, Slavic, Greek, or some combination of all three. Sources written during his reign describe Basil the Macedonian as being descended from the kings of Armenia and the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, though no reliable modern evidence exists to support that claim. Basil and his family were abducted by the Khan of Bulgaria in 813 AD, when he was only about 2 years old, and he lived there until the year 836, when he and a group of other prisoners escaped back to the Byzantine Empire. He first came to the empire's capital, Constantinople, that same year, and soon entered into the service of a relative of the Empress Theodora as a groom. In this position he travelled all across Greece and built a network of close friends and confidants, as well as a small personal fortune. He returned to Constantinople at some point in the mid-840s as a wealthy and somewhat influential man. When Basil returned to Constantinople, Theodora's son, Michael III, had become emperor, but was at that point only a child, so his mother ruled at the head of a regency. Perhaps due to his young age, Michael III was not at all a strong emperor, and was known for his drunkenness and general debauchery. In 855 AD, he had appointed his uncle, Bardus, to the higher-ranking position of Caesar, making him second in power only to the emperor in the imperial hierarchy. Then at age 16, with his uncle's prompting and aid, Michael overthrew the regency led by his mother. But rather than taking full power as emperor, he essentially became Bardus's puppet and allowed his uncle to dominate most areas of imperial policy while he lived a hedonistic life of luxury. Michael III's attention was first brought to Basil the Macedonian a few years later, when Basil won a wrestling contest against a Bulgarian champion in Constantinople. The two men were introduced, and eventually Basil impressed Michael enough to be appointed to the trusted position of captain of the Imperial Guard. Basil and Michael seemingly became friends, Michael even promoted the low-born Basil to the position of chamberlain, giving him a great deal of power within the imperial household. And Basil even divorced his own wife to marry Michael's pregnant mistress and save the emperor from scandal. For Basil, though, chamberlain was not enough. He saw Michael's uncle, the powerful Caesar Bardus, as a threat to his own imperial ambitions. So in 865 AD, while the emperor, Basil, and Bardus were on campaign against Arab forces in Crete, Basil convinced Michael that Bardus was planning on seizing his throne and received the emperor's tacit permission to brutally murder the Caesar. When Basil and Michael returned to Constantinople, Michael rewarded Basil's supposed loyalty by, quite oddly, adopting his much older friend as his son, and then elevating him to the position of co-emperor. Now at this point, you would be forgiven for thinking that the interesting parts of Basil's story have come to an end. That as co-emperor, he would have achieved more than any peasant could possibly have dreamt of, and that he would at last be happy. You would be forgiven for thinking that his ambitions would be put to rest. You, however, unfortunately, would be wrong. Michael III's habit of letting others handle the day-to-day goings-on of the Byzantine Empire, while he spent his time living the privileged life of an emperor, did not die with Caesar Bardus, as following his murder, Basil took over as the power behind the imperial throne. This arrangement did little to satisfy Basil's lust for power, though. He sought nothing less than total control of the empire, but as Michael's co-emperor, he had to share the reins of power with a young, weak man who was no longer of any use to him. Basil's growing hostility towards Michael quickly became clear, and Michael threatened to strip him of the rank of co-emperor. To prevent this, Basil, in a daring move, murdered Michael in 867 AD, while he was a guest at a dinner party hosted by Basil. With Michael out of the way, Basil I of the Byzantine Empire took over as the sole inheritor of the legacy of Rome. For the next 19 years, Basil the Macedonian ruled over a stable and prosperous Byzantine Empire. He grew Byzantium's power by re-establishing strongholds across the Mediterranean and Adriatic seas. He allied the empire with new European powers to the west and defeated Arab forces that threatened Byzantium's security in the east. Perhaps his most important achievement was the creation of a new legal code for the empire. Known as the Basilica, it simplified and clarified the laws of Byzantium. The Basilica remained in effect for nearly 600 years following Basil's own death, and only ceased to be the laws of the Byzantine Empire when it was conquered by the Turks in 1453. Elements of the Basilica, though, are still present even in modern Greek law. Basil I of the Byzantine Empire was killed while hunting on August 29, 886 AD, and was succeeded by his son, Leo VI. The Macedonian dynasty continued to rule the Byzantine Empire for another 170 years.